Oh look, another controversial top few hundred greatest list from the guys and gals at Rolling Stone magazine. Previously, they've given us a couple greatest albums of all time lists, the greatest songs of all time, the greatest guitarists, and a bunch of others. And every one of them has been controversial on some level. Over the last few weeks, though, it's been their ranking of the 200 greatest singers that's been riling people up. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Discord servers, Instagram, TikTok, even rock stars like Gene Simmons and Marty Friedman are whinging about it. It doesn't matter where you turn, someone has a problem with the list. Or, more specifically, wherever you turn, someone has a problem with the order of the list. Rolling Stone are clueless, they say. They have no idea what makes a good singer. How could they put him above her? And why is he missed out entirely? But what if I told you that the problem isn't really with the order of the list? The problem isn't that Michael Jackson only got placed at number 86. Though that is completely crazy, and yeah, I would have expected to see Celine Dion and a few others who are completely missed off to appear somewhere. But the problem isn't really with who is placed where. The problems, plural, are with making such a list in the first place, with Rolling Stone magazine as an institution, and, most importantly, I think, the strange and frankly unjustified position that the magazine occupies in popular culture. Now, these problems all sort of blend into one another and they're part and parcel of the same thing, and I'm sure much of it will be old news to a lot of people. But anyway, here's my not so little video about it all. I just gotta get out of this prison cell. Someday I'm gonna be free. So, firstly, the problem with making a list like this in the first place, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that these greatest lists should never be made, and they do have their uses, but the issue is just that making a useful or accurate greatest list is a nigh on impossible and certainly thankless task. Like, what even is great? Rolling Stone magazine themselves say in the introduction to their list, keep in mind that this is the greatest singers list, not the greatest voices list. Talent is impressive, genius is transcendental, sure. Many people here were born with massive pipes, perfect pitch, and boundless range. Others have rougher, stranger, or more delicate instruments. As our write-up for the man who ended up at number 112 notes, Ozzy Osbourne doesn't have what most people would call a good voice, but boy does he have a great one. And that could apply to a few people here. In all cases, what mattered most to us was originality, influence, and depth of an artist's catalogue and the breadth of their musical legacy. Which, to be fair to them, isn't completely objectionable as far as things go. I agree that if we're talking about great, we can't just do it based on pure technical competency or raw vocal range. Greatest is different to best, and that's why Bob Dylan is rightfully higher on this list than a bunch of technically much better singers. Like, there will be loads even of just young kids who are measurably better from a pure competency point of view than Bob Dylan, but they're not greater, and I think that's obvious. This great versus good thing even partly explains why Bob Dylan appears higher on this list than, say, Michael Jackson. Michael was clearly the better singer, but was he greater? To be honest, yeah, possibly. Maybe? I mean, who knows? What does it mean to be great? It's all a bit vague, isn't it? Sure, it is accurate to say that Bob Dylan's always been greater than he is good, at least as a singer, and he's possibly the single most important artist of the second half of the 20th century. And whether you like him and his singing or not, he needs to be on the list somewhere. But then Michael Jackson was technically brilliant and undeniably great too, so why is one at number 86 and the other at 15? This brings us back around to the start. If we are talking about greatness in the way that Rolling Stone are, and not just best, then we are, as Marty Friedman actually quite correctly points out on Twitter, just working on a sui generis definition of quality, just sort of appealing to a presumed self-evident truth about the uniqueness of certain singers, and the list becomes, frankly, a little pointless, maybe? Or at least very hard to pin down and justify. Back to Bob Dylan again. As I just said, he's definitely a greater singer than he is a good singer, so I'd expect to see him somewhere in the top 200. But how do you go about justifying placing Bob Dylan higher than Michael Jackson? Well, there is no real empirical or logical or particularly agreeable justification for it. Rolling Stone just sort of implicitly shrug and say greatness is just like what it is, man. Many people will agree, and I'm sure many people will totally disagree. A lot of their decision making on this list is going to be simply based on their editorial biases, what they think is going to go down well with their readership, and what might generate a bit of controversy and therefore clicks and ad revenue. Another problem, possibly a bigger problem for me actually, is that this whole list, quite frankly, just feels low effort. The actual write-up itself, I mean, they claim to have put all this work into determining the rankings, asking these people, conferring with those, and getting experts and musicians involved. But the write-up itself is very lackluster. I actually went and physically looked at a copy of the magazine to make sure that it wasn't just the online one that sucked. But yeah, nothing interesting here either, really. So what is going on? This is all part of my general problem with most music journalism. It's largely written by people who, dare I say, don't know anything about music. I reckon that the vast majority of music critics would struggle to tell you what a musical scale or a secondary dominant is. And to be honest, that stuff's not exactly hard. You might think I'm being a snob about this, and maybe I am, but can you imagine a book critic not knowing the difference between verbs and nouns? I think it's fair to expect a bit more from music critics and journalists. I mean, it's their job. And this list just, for me, does not deliver. What's it for? And the thing is, all of these types of lists end up feeling like this, whether that's other greatest lists put out by Rolling Stone or other media outlets. They're just not good content. Or, to put it more accurately, the quality of this content is predicated solely on the assumed authority of the magazine putting it together. So, if Rolling Stone do know what they're talking about, as in if they're an authority, then the list is obviously valuable. But do they? Are they actually an authority on these matters? Well, that's not up to me to decide, but I don't think so. So put aside for a second whether you actually agree with the order of the list or not, and just ask yourself, what did you learn from this list? What did you get from it beyond a mild sense of shock and scandal? How much more interesting would it be if we got a little write-up about each singer's vocal range and vocal style by someone who actually knows what they're talking about? A bit more context around their influences, when they were active, how much music they put out, how they impacted popular culture, maybe a bit on how their voices changed through the years, how good they were at maybe holding a note or hitting a note in the first place, their skills at arranging vocals, vocal improvisation, songwriting. I don't know. I don't write for Rolling Stone magazine, but I feel they could have done something more. There's just so much they could have done that they did not. But hey, look, in spite of all of that, these lists can actually be useful, particularly if you're a younger fan of music, just getting into it all and looking for a go-to place to understand the lay of the land. Whatever the issues with the list, and there are loads, everyone in the top 20 is at least a good singer. Everyone in the top 20 is or was very influential, and some of them, Patsy Cline being a good example, are arguably unjustly forgotten or underrated today. So a list like this could help people learn about the most influential artists across genres and in different time periods. It might also introduce someone to music that they might not have heard otherwise, but they genuinely come to love. So that's surely a good thing, right? And I do like that Rolling Stone at least seem to have put some effort into doing that. A question we might want to ask at this point, though, is simply why? Why make a list like this if it's such a thankless and impossible task, and it definitely is, that just generates controversy for Rolling Stone, which it definitely does? Why would any magazine bother making such a list? Well, this leads us to the next point. My problem with Rolling Stone as an institution. So look, I don't read Rolling Stone magazine. I might even say that its continued existence baffles me a little bit. But I don't hate Rolling Stone magazine, and if you enjoy it, that's fine. Either way, it's only when they generate some kind of controversy like this latest list that they even come to my troglodytic attention. So what is my issue with Rolling Stone magazine? Well, the problems I have with rock and pop journalism generally, that I mentioned before briefly, are, I think, particularly applicable to Rolling Stone. They do not at all exist to produce the valuable, informative, educational, or, I don't know, challenging content that I would actually be interested in. In a way, it's actually a category error on my part to complain about the lack of that stuff. Instead, what they're looking to do, and this is inevitable and understandable to some degree, what they're looking to do is stay relevant and important to as many people as possible. They want to maintain the cultural position that they first attained in the late 60s and have to some degree managed to maintain for the last 50 odd years. And they want to make money. They exist to make money. The whole valuable content, informative articles, challenging journalism bit is secondary to the fact that they're an old, popular culture print magazine looking to stay in existence and stay relevant to mainstream popular culture and to make bank. And there was once a time when much of that must simply have felt like a given. I mean, it was a given. Rolling Stone's relevance was self-evident in the 70s, and they weren't trying to stay in touch with the popular culture beyond them. To a large degree, they were popular culture, at least in the Anglosphere. They held a massive amount of sway over people's media consumption and were, if not then amongst the most important tastemakers for a good couple decades, and I will never forgive them how they treated progressive rock in the 70s. It's this culturally dominant position and the commercial success that they enjoyed during that period that they are looking to maintain and retain when they release a top few hundred greatest whatever list. And the thing is, it works. I mean, just look at their Google Trends results in the last few weeks since the release of this list. In this current attention economy age, it's important that they do this. Their paychecks are literally just dependent on driving engagement and getting clicks. And that age-old aphorism about any publicity being good publicity is probably more true now than ever. And to be fair to Rolling Stone, they are in a tricky position that I can empathize with at least a little bit. Historically, they've been mostly a rock-oriented magazine, and that reputation still lingers. But rock is no longer the dominant musical culture. It's been a while since it was, and they clearly recognize as a publication that they need to move on with the times. So when they make a list like this, they can't just put all the old white guys at the top and expect to be taken seriously. But at the same time, by not doing that, they're likely going to alienate a lot of older readers or even just younger fans with set expectations of Rolling Stone magazine as an institution. How are they meant to navigate that while making money? They need to embrace a bit of controversy, surely. It's a genuinely really hard position to be in. And for all my whining about them, I don't have a viable solution for music journalists or anyone working for Rolling Stone or similar magazines. And that's because my solution it's not a solution at all, but let's pretend for a moment it is. My solution is, let's all, at the very least, knock Rolling Stone and other magazines like them off the pedestal that they've been placed on. The pedestal it has somehow managed to stay on for around, 55? Something like that years now? Yeah, 55 years. So this clearly doesn't solve any of Rolling Stone's problems, but it solves our problems. Or maybe it just solves my problems. I said before that I don't think much of most popular music journalists or critics. I have a problem with it all. I just don't think that anyone should put that much stock in what they have to say. But loads of people do. This list and lists like it only generate controversy in the first place because we tacitly accept these magazines and critics' positions on that pedestal that they didn't even really earn in the first place. And then people end up all annoyed and a bit grumpy that a respected institution could get it all so wrong. But I think we have it all so wrong, not them, although also them. Like, most people act as if we can judge the quality of an artist by the awards they receive. In music, that might be the Grammys or inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or even their placement on lists like these. Just go look at Wikipedia pages for albums and see how they list, as if it actually matters what accolades they've been given by Rolling Stone magazine. I mean, as if it matters that Rolling Stone think that Marvin Gaye's What's Going On is the greatest album of all time, or that Pet Sounds is number 2, or that the Beatles have a bunch placed in the top 50s. Those albums and those artists are far bigger and more important than Rolling Stone magazine is and ever was, as far as I'm concerned. So rather than looking to an institution like the Rolling Stone magazine to tell us how great a singer or an artist or album, whatever is, maybe we should look at their ratings and how they explain their thinking and the quality of their write-up, etc. And from all of that, judge how highly we think of the magazine. But we don't do that. A lot of us instead have this weird, honestly quite dysfunctional collective relationship with Rolling Stone magazine and other outlets, where they've been idealized into something they're not and never have been. Now, Rolling Stone are nowhere near as bad as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who suck, but they have similar issues. They're just an institution set up by a bunch of people, fallible people. They're an institution that happens to have existed for a while and who think that alone legitimizes them. But they're no more legitimate than any other institution or individual. But because they have existed for a good while now, and because they are a part of the fabric of popular culture, sharing a name with one of the biggest bands of all time, being mentioned in loads of pop and rock songs, being just a general part of the history of popular culture, they've graduated into their current position. So look, I want to make something clear. I'm not saying that the Rolling Stone list is wrong, necessarily, although it is. I'm not really sure what a right list would be. In a way, it's as good a list as any. No, it isn't. I'm not even saying that Rolling Stone shouldn't make such a list, or that I could do a better job, or anything like that. Actually, I kind of am. What I am saying is, Wait, what am I saying? Just that we should put a little or a lot less stock in what they say, or what any other similar institution says, whether that's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Grammys, or whoever. Although, again, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in particular actively sucks, and we should all hate them. We should first ask ourselves who made this list and why. Why should their opinion or their methodology be worth more than any other? Rolling Stone is just a music magazine with a few contributing journalists, all with their own opinions and biases, which in and of itself is fine. And this whole thing is just about Rolling Stone magazine trying to sell as many copies as possible, trying to get as many clicks as possible, to make as much money as possible, and to survive into what we might think of as something as a post-rock age. Rolling Stone magazine has historically had that very obvious rock bias, which isn't inherently bad, but that simply isn't going to cut it in today's musical environment. They have to move with the times. And moving with the times is fine and good. And I'm sure that the editors and writers over there have changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. So it's not necessarily them being disingenuous about it all to change it up a bit. Basically, it's very complex, isn't it? In the end, though, I just think this whole, oh man, Rolling Stone said a thing I disagree with, and the awful kind of discourse is a bit of a waste of time. Like, why are we all getting caught up in this? There are far more important and interesting things to talk about on any topic, including within music. It's just not really a proper conversation to say, oh, I think so-and-so should be higher. Why haven't they included this person? It's a list of 200 people. They're going to miss out loads of people, and they're going to have to put someone ahead of someone else. The rock fans will get offended if one person doesn't appear high enough, and then the pop fans are going to get offended by something else, and the jazz fans will probably get offended by another thing entirely. More importantly, though, it's just an example of all of us falling into that clickbait exploitation of everyone by everyone in the attention economy trap that's been set for us, and which Rolling Stone magazine pretty much have to play. And yes, I did kind of fall for it myself, but oh well. Rolling Stone are a popular culture and news magazine trying to not just report on the news, but to create and to be the news. And yeah, they've succeeded, clearly. I mean, I'm talking about it all, and loads of people are, including other outlets and famous musicians. Rolling Stone are trying to do this partly because that's what they and the rest of us, including me, have to do today to stay relevant and successful, but partly because that's what they once were. Like, Dr. Hook wrote a song about how much they wanted to be on the cover of Rolling Stone, and then they kind of got that wish granted a year later when they appeared in caricature. This song and that event is also then referenced in Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous. And then George Harrison was so annoyed with Rolling Stone's reviews of his mid-70s output that he whined about them in a song, and he held a grudge against them for years. Kind of seems maybe a bit silly today that someone as successful as George Harrison would care what Rolling Stone magazine thinks of his album. And I do think it is a bit silly. Like, come on, George, you're super rich and your albums sell well. Just chill a bit. But the negative Rolling Stone reviews of albums like Living in a Material World and Extra Texture were accepted as the received wisdom at the time, in spite of other publications actually quite liking them. So, Rolling Stone was at one point the news. They were the rock establishment. They were tastemakers and cultural mainstays. But with the decline of rock and changing media consumption habits and loads of other societal and cultural changes, they've lost that position a bit, and they're clearly trying to hold on as tightly as possible while trying to regain some of that lost ground. They do this partly by releasing controversial lists ranking the supposedly 200 greatest singers of all time, but also through caught in controversy in other ways. In 2013, they famously put Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on their cover. You know, the prime suspect later actually convicted in the Boston bombings. And remember, this is a popular culture magazine most famous for interviewing rock stars and putting theoretically admirable people on the cover. Yeah, it went down as well as you'd expect, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Because look again at those Google Trends results. It works. Look at all those juicy clicks, all that ad revenue. And look at the current Google Trends since releasing that list of greatest singers. People love that stuff. We all love it. And now I've basically done the same in a way. I've monopolized your attention for myself, and God knows why anyone would think my opinion is worth anything. But the attention treadmill continues. We're all part of the problem. Please like and subscribe, please and thanks. Bye.